Have you ever trusted someone so much that you ignored all the signs? She did too, until the day she gave birth and discovered that her love hid another story. At the most delicate moment of her life, amidst tears and promises, a glance revealed the truth. And now I ask you, how far would you go for someone who claimed to love you? If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, the day dawned with that golden glow typical of London, when the sun still struggles to pierce through the city's perpetual hum. Marina Albright woke up feeling the first contractions, those that every maternity book describes as the beginning of a transformative journey. At 32, she was about to fulfill the dream she shared with Raphael Miller, her husband of 5 years, the man she had met at a corporate event and fallen in love with at first sight. The apartment in Kensington, with its 200 square meters and a view of Hyde Park, was the perfect setting for the family that was about to be completed. Marina tenderly held her belly, feeling her son stir, as if he too knew that the big day had arrived. Raphael slept beside her, his face serene, his dark hair slightly disheveled, and she felt a wave of love that almost made her forget the contractions that were beginning to intensify. But there was something, a feeling Marina couldn't name, a shadow that from time to time passed through her mind and that she always tried to push away. In the last months of her pregnancy, Raphael had changed. Nothing too obvious, nothing that could be put into concrete words, just small signs. His phone always face down, calls he answered by stepping out of the room, weekends when he needed to resolve urgent company matters. Marina tried to convince herself that it was just the stress of impending fatherhood, that every man gets nervous when he's about to become a father. She woke him with a gentle touch on his shoulder. Raphael opened his eyes, and for an instant, Marina saw something she couldn't decipher. It was too quick, a flash of something that could be guilt, worry, or simply the shock of waking up suddenly. He soon smiled, that smile that had captivated her years. They go and said it was time to go to the hospital. St. Jude's Hospital was one of the most renowned institutions in London, an imposing building in the Mayfair area that served only a select clientele. Marina had chosen to give birth there, not only for the medical excellence, but because that place held special meaning in her life. Her father, Albert Albright, was a discreet but extremely influential businessman in the London scene. Few knew, but he was the true owner of that hospital, part of an empire built over decades based on values he never compromised: ethics, transparency, and justice. Albert had always been a present father, even with a busy schedule. After Marina lost her mother in adolescence, a victim of a sudden illness, he became both father and mother, friend and counselor. He was a man of average height, neatly combed grey hair, eyes that conveyed a mixture of firmness and kindness. He adored Raphael, or at least that's what Marina believed. At family gatherings, Albert treated his son-in-law with cordiality, made jokes, asked about business. But Marina noticed that sometimes her father observed Raphael with an attention that went beyond simple curiosity. In the car, on the way to the hospital, Raphael held the steering wheel with both hands, his eyes fixed on the Oxford Street traffic. Marina looked out the window, watching the city pass in flashes of mirrored buildings, designer stores, and busy sidewalks. London was like that, a metropolis that never stopped, where fortunes were made and unmade in a matter of hours, where appearances counted more than essences. Raphael Miller was the type of man London seemed to churn out in series. Ambitious, charming, always impeccably dressed. At 37, he commanded a business consulting firm that had grown exponentially in recent years. He was good with numbers, even better with people. He knew exactly what to say, how to smile, when to impress. Marina had fallen in love with his confidence, with his ability to make everything seem possible. But lately, she had begun to realize that Raphael was too good at creating facades. She had no proof, just intuition, that sixth sense women develop when something isn't right. The phone conversations he abruptly ended when she entered the room, the business trips that extended for more days than necessary, the different perfume she had smelled on his shirt a few times. Marina pushed these thoughts away, Today was the day her son would be born. Today was a day to celebrate life, not to feed suspicions that could just be the result of disordered hormones and pre-labor anxiety. They arrived at St. Jude's Hospital at 7:30 in the morning. The main entrance, with its Italian marble floors and crystal chandeliers, looked more like a five-star hotel reception than a healthcare institution. The team was already waiting. Dr. Henry Carter, the obstetrician who had followed Marina throughout her pregnancy, personally came to greet them. He was a man in his 50s, with a calm voice and steady hands, known for having delivered the children of dozens of important London families. Marina was taken to the maternity's presidential suite, an environment that looked more like a luxury hotel room, with a leather sofa, flat-screen television, and a private bathroom with a jacuzzi. Raphael stayed by her side, holding her hand, saying words of encouragement. But Marina noticed that he checked his phone frequently, and his eyes seemed distant, as if part of him was elsewhere. The contractions intensified. The medical team entered and exited several times, monitoring the progress of labor. Marina, focused on breathing, on following instructions, on imagining the moment she would finally hold her son in her arms. Between contractions, she thought of the name they had chosen, Gabriel. A strong name, a name that meant divine protection. It was then that she appeared. A woman of approximately 30, dressed in the hospital's light blue nursing uniform, entered the room with a tray containing medications. She had brown hair tied in an impeccable bun, delicate features, calculated movements. Marina observed her for an instant, feeling something strange. It wasn't a physical sensation, but an emotional one, as if that woman carried a disturbing energy with her. The nurse introduced herself as Letitia, said she was there to assist with the procedure, and moved around the room with the familiarity of someone who knew every inch of that environment. Marina tried to smile, but a new contraction overwhelmed her, making her close her eyes and focus only on the pain that coursed through her body. What Marina didn't see was the exchange of glances between Raphael and Letitia. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was loaded with meaning. Raphael immediately diverted his gaze, returning his attention to Marina, while Letitia strategically positioned herself near the medical equipment. Dr. Henry entered the room accompanied by two more nurses. It was time. Labor had progressed, and it was time to prepare for the birth. Marina was taken to the delivery room, an even more equipped environment, with powerful surgical lights, monitors beeping at a constant rhythm, and a team ready for any eventuality. Raphael remained by her side, dressed in the disposable gown that all companions wore. He held Marina's hand, but his eyes continued to wander around the room, and she noticed that he observed Letitia with an attention that didn't fit the moment. Marina tried to focus. She tried to concentrate on the doctor's instructions, on her breathing, on the strength she needed to exert. But there was something wrong in the air, a tension that shouldn't exist in a delivery room. She looked at the ceiling, saw the security cameras in the corners, those small devices her father had insisted on installing in all hospital rooms. He always said that transparency was the foundation of any serious institution. Hours dragged on. Labor was intense, painful, exhausting. Marina felt she was at the limit of her strength when, finally, she heard Gabriel's cry. It was as if the world stopped for an instant. All the pains, all the worries, everything dissolved in that sound that represented life, continuity, love. Dr. Henry handed the baby to Marina, and she held him against her chest, feeling the warmth of that small life she had generated. Gabriel had closed eyes, clenched fists, and cried with the strength of someone who had just discovered the world. Raphael approached, gently touched his son's head, and Marina saw tears in his eyes. For a moment she believed that everything was fine, that her family was complete, that the ghosts haunting her were just creations of her tired mind. But then she noticed. Letitia was standing in the corner of the room, observing the scene with an expression that didn't fit the moment. It wasn't joy. It wasn't professional emotion. It was something close to resentment, a mask trying to hide feelings that shouldn't be there. Marina tried to dismiss that thought. She was exhausted, had just given birth. Her hormones were in turmoil. It wasn't the time to create conspiracy theories about a nurse who was probably just tired from a long shift. She was. Taken back to the suite, Gabriel went to the nursery for initial care and Marina could finally rest. Raphael said he needed to make some calls, that he had urgent company matters to resolve, and left the room. Marina closed her eyes, feeling her body sore, but her heart full. She didn't know that at that exact moment, in a hospital monitoring room, a security technician was watching the day's recordings. It was standard procedure to review images of all births, part of the quality protocol that Albert Albright insisted on maintaining. The technician, a young man named Luke, was about to mark that video as reviewed when something caught his attention. He rewound the image, he watched more carefully, and then he saw it. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Nurse Letitia, during a moment when everyone was focused on Gabriel's birth, approached Marina's monitoring equipment. Her fingers touched some buttons, made adjustments that didn't seem necessary. And the most disturbing thing, she looked directly at Raphael, who was on the other side of the room, and he responded with a minimal nod, so discreet it could pass for a nervous tic. Luke felt a chill down his spine. He had worked at that hospital for 3 years, knew the protocols, knew how to recognize when something was out of the ordinary. That was not normal. He saved the video in a separate file, marked it with high priority, and following the security protocol, sent an automatic notification to the hospital director. The director was Albert Albright himself. In the suite, Marina slept soundly, recovering from childbirth. Raphael was in the corridor, on the phone, his voice low but tense. On the other end of the line, Letitia said that everything had gone as planned, that no one would suspect anything, that in a few days she could finally take the place that was rightfully hers. Raphael looked around, making sure he was alone, and replied that she needed to be patient, that things couldn't be rushed, that Marina was still useful for now. Useful. He had used that word to describe the mother of his child, the woman he had married, the woman who had just endured hours of pain to bring Gabriel into the world. Letitia was not actually a nurse. She had obtained the uniform, had bribed an employee to include her name, on that day's schedule, had planned every detail with the precision of someone who had nothing to lose. She had been Raphael's mistress for 2 years, ever since they met at a business conference in Washington, D.C. What began as a physical attraction had evolved into something more dangerous, a mutual obsession fueled by promises of a different life, away from responsibilities and appearances. Raphael had promised her he would leave Marina as soon as the baby was born. He said he was just waiting for the right moment, that he needed to secure his share of the Albright family fortune before leaving. Letitia believed, or wanted to believe. She had abandoned her own job, her own life, to dedicate herself to this relationship that existed in the shadows. But Raphael was a man of calculations. He knew exactly the value of Albert Albright's assets, knew that Marina was an only child, knew that a simple divorce would not guarantee him the share he considered deserved. He needed more time, more strategy. And Letitia, passionate and desperate, agreed to participate in a plan that crossed all boundaries of decency. The plan was not to physically harm Marina. Raphael was not violent, just manipulative. The idea was to create situations that would emotionally weaken her, make her doubt herself, lead her to a mental state where she would accept a divorce on terms favorable to him. And childbirth was the perfect time to start. A moment of vulnerability, where small interferences could be attributed to stress, hormones, fatigue. Letitia had adjusted some monitors to create false alarms, to make Marina think something was wrong with the baby, to plant seeds of anxiety and insecurity that would blossom in the following days. It was psychological, not physical. It was cruel, but it left no visible marks. What neither of them knew was that everything had been captured by the cameras, every glance, every gesture, every adjustment to the equipment. St. Jude's Hospital's security cameras were state-of-the-art, installed at Albert Albright's insistence, who believed that technology was an ally of truth. While Marina slept and Raphael conspired, Albert Albright was in his office in Canary Wharf, a few blocks from the hospital. He had just received the notification from the security system. Something in his daughter's delivery room had been marked as abnormal. He frowned, feeling that intuition that decades of business experience had sharpened. He picked up the phone and called Luke, the security technician, directly. "What did you see?" Albert asked, his voice firm but controlled. Luke hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He described Letitia's movements, the exchange of glances with Raphael, the adjustments to the equipment that were not part of the standard protocol. Albert listened in silence, feeling something break inside him. It wasn't anger yet, it was worse. It was the confirmation of a suspicion he had harbored for months, but had never wanted to admit. If you were living this story, would you confront immediately or investigate? Further before acting? Leave your opinion in the comments. Albert asked Luke to prepare a complete copy of all recordings from the day, from Marina's entry into the hospital until that moment. He wanted to see everything, understand everything. Then he hung up the phone and stood before his office window, looking out at the city that stretched as far as the eye could see. London, with its brutal contrasts, its grandeur and its misery, its dreams and its betrayals. He thought of his daughter, the girl he had raised alone after losing his wife. He thought of all the times he had protected her, of all the decisions he had made thinking of her well-being. And now, on the day she became a mother, on the day that should have been pure joy, men were conspiring against her in the corridors of his own hospital. Albert Albright was not a man of outbursts. He was the type who planned, who gathered evidence, who waited for the right moment. But as he looked out at the city, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a cold, calculated anger, the kind that moved mountains and destroyed empires. He picked up the phone again and made a call to his personal lawyer, Maurice Lawson, a man who had been with him for 20 years and knew every legal detail of the Albright empire. "Maurice," Albert said, "I need you to cancel all your appointments for the week. We have a delicate situation, and I need you to be available 24 hours a day." Maurice, accustomed to Albert's tone, asked no questions. He simply confirmed that he would be available. At the hospital, Marina woke up with the feeling that something was different. It wasn't physical pain, it was something more subtle. She looked around the empty suite, searched for Raphael and didn't find him. She rang the bell and a nurse entered, not Letitia, but another, a white-haired lady with a gentle smile named Nurse Irene. Nurse Irene had worked at St. Jude's Hospital since its inauguration 20 years ago. She knew Albert Albright personally, had seen Marina grow up, had witnessed the transformation of that timid girl into a strong and independent woman. And Nurse Irene had that wisdom that comes from decades of observing people. She saw Marina wake up and noticed something in her eyes, a shadow of concern that shouldn't be there at a moment like that. "Everything's fine, dear," Nurse Irene said, approaching the bed. "Gabriel is perfect, resting in the nursery. You were amazing today." Marina smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Where is Raphael?" she asked. Nurse Irene hesitated for a second before answering that he had gone out to make calls, that he would be back soon. But in that second of hesitation, Marina saw something. Nurse Irene knew something. There was a tension in the air that Marina couldn't identify. She wanted to ask more, but the words wouldn't come out. Maybe it was better not to know. Maybe it was better to continue living in the illusion that everything was fine. Raphael returned half an hour later, bringing flowers and a wide smile. He kissed Marina on the forehead, held her hand, said all the right words. But Marina, still dizzy from the medications and exhaustion, couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, that an invisible line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. Meanwhile, on another floor of the hospital, Albert Albright watched the security footage on his laptop. He saw everything. He saw Letitia entering the delivery room with false credentials. He saw the glances exchanged between her and Raphael. He saw the adjustments to the equipment. And he saw, reflected on one of the monitor screens, Raphael smiling with satisfaction when one of the alarms went off, making Marina panic for a few seconds before Dr. Henry resolved the situation. Albert closed the laptop and took a deep breath. He had all the proof he needed. He had evidence of manipulation, of fraud, of a conspiracy that could have had much worse consequences. But he was not a man to act on impulse. He knew he needed to plan every step, every move, every revelation, because this wasn't just about protecting Marina. It was about justice. It was about showing that even the powerful, even those who think they can buy and manipulate everything, eventually find someone more powerful, someone more determined, someone who refuses to negotiate when it comes to family. Albert picked up the phone once more and dialed the number of someone he hadn't spoken to in years, Beatrice Finch, one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country. They had worked together decades ago when she was starting her career, and he needed to expose a corruption scheme that threatened his businesses. Since then, they had maintained sporadic contact, a friendship based on mutual respect. "Beatrice," Albert said when she answered, "I need your help, and I need your discretion. I have a story that will interest you, but it needs to be handled with great care. It involves my daughter." Beatrice, always attentive, noticed the gravity in Albert's tone. She had covered dozens of corporate scandals, knew how to recognize when a story had the potential to explode. "I'm listening," she said. "Not over the phone," Albert replied. "Tomorrow in my office, bring your trusted team, you'll need them." Night fell over London, and the city lit up with millions of lights that twinkled like terrestrial stars. At St. Jude's Hospital, Marina cradled Gabriel for the first time since his birth, feeling that overwhelming love that only motherhood can bring. But somewhere deep in her mind, a voice whispered that nothing was as it seemed, that the walls of that luxurious hospital hid secrets that would soon come to light. Raphael slept on the suite sofa, seemingly peaceful, but his dreams were tormented by images of everything that could go wrong. Letitia was in her rented apartment in Islington, waiting for a message from Raphael that never came, beginning to feel the first cracks of a truth she didn't want to admit. She was just a pawn in a much bigger game, and pawns are disposable. And Albert Albright in his apartment in Regent's Park prepared the breakfast he would make the next day, chose the tie he would wear, planned every word he would say, because he knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. The war had begun, silent and calculated, but relentless. Gabriel's first day of life ended with a heavy silence, laden with unspoken promises and still buried truths. But the sun would rise again, as it always does in London, bringing with it enough light to expose even the most hidden shadows. The morning of the second day arrived with that characteristic bustle of London, where even a Sunday seems like a weekday for those living in the upscale neighborhoods of the West End. Marina woke up to Gabriel crying in the bassinet next to her bed. It was a strong, healthy cry that made her smile even, with her body still sore from childbirth. She slowly got up, picked up her son, and sat in the nursing armchair that Raphael had ordered from an expensive Bond Street store. Raphael was not in the suite. Marina looked at the clock and saw it was 7 in the morning. She tried not to be bothered by his absence. After all, men don't need to wake up every 3 hours to breastfeed. But there was something about the way he was distant, not just physically but emotionally, that bothered her. Throughout her pregnancy, Raphael had been attentive, present, always saying the right things. But now that Gabriel had been born, it was as if a switch had been flipped. Marina began to breastfeed, feeling that unique connection between mother and child, when the door opened and Nurse Irene entered, pushing a cart with breakfast. The nurse had that maternal way that decades in the profession develop, and Marina immediately felt more comfortable in her presence. "How was your night, dear?" Nurse Irene asked as she arranged the table. Marina replied that it had been difficult, that Gabriel had woken up several times, but that she was happy. Nurse Irene smiled, but Marina again noticed that shadow of concern in the nurse's eyes. There was something she wanted to say but didn't, a hesitation that Marina was beginning to recognize in everyone around her. "Nurse Irene," Marina called, her voice soft but firm. "Is something happening that I should know?" The nurse stopped what she was doing and looked at Marina with those eyes that had seen so many stories unfold in that hospital. She opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by Raphael's entry, who arrived bringing more flowers and that smile that no longer convinced Marina as before. "Good morning, love of my life," Raphael said, kissing Marina on the forehead. "I brought white roses, your favorites." Marina thanked him, but her eyes met Nurse Irene's, who discreetly shook her head almost imperceptibly, as if to say it wasn't the time to reveal anything. The nurse left the room, leaving the couple alone. Raphael approached, gently touched Gabriel's head, but Marina noticed that he was constantly checking his phone. She wanted to ask, wanted to confront, but she felt afraid. Afraid that if she started pulling that thread, the entire fabric of her life would unravel. Meanwhile, in Albert Albright's office in Canary Wharf, a meeting was about to begin. Beatrice Finch arrived promptly at 9 in the morning, accompanied by her editor and a lawyer specializing in press law. Albert received them in his private office, an environment with noble wood-paneled walls, shelves full of business law and economics books, and a panoramic view of London that stretched to the horizon. Albert wasted no time with formalities. He connected his laptop to a large screen and began to show the hospital's security recordings. Beatrice watched in silence, her eyes trained to detect details that others would miss. She saw the glances exchanged between Raphael and Leticia, saw the adjustments to the equipment, saw the smile of satisfaction on Raphael's face when the false alarm went off. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Beatrice was the first to speak. "Are you sure you want to expose this publicly? This will destroy your daughter's marriage, Raphael's reputation, and possibly put you and Marina in a spotlight that could be very uncomfortable." Albert looked at the journalist with that determination that had built his empire. "My daughter deserves to know the truth. And other women deserve to know who Raphael Miller really is before he does this to someone else. This isn't about revenge, Beatrice. It's about justice." Beatrice nodded, understanding. She had spent years documenting corporate, political, and social scandals, but there was something about that story that touched her differently. It was personal, yes, but it was also representative of something larger. How many women went through similar situations without ever discovering the truth? How many men thought they were untouchable because they had money and connections? "I'll need to interview people from the hospital," Beatrice said. "Staff who were present, doctors, nurses. I need to build a complete profile of Raphael Miller, his company, his finances. And I need to find this Leticia." Albert had done his homework. He handed Beatrice a folder containing detailed information about Raphael. Maurice, his lawyer, had worked all night gathering public data. Raphael's consulting firm had grown exponentially in recent years, but there were signs that not all of that growth was legitimate. Overpriced contracts with shell companies, consultants who didn't exist, expenses that didn't make sense. As for Leticia, Albert had managed to identify her through the hospital cameras. Her full name was Leticia Rodriguez Santos, and she worked as an event manager at a medium-sized company in Shoreditch. She had no nursing training, no official connection with St. Jude's Hospital. She had obtained the uniform through an employee in the laundry department who, after being pressured by Albert's security team, confessed to having been bribed with £5,000 to provide false credentials. Beatrice looked at the information and felt that adrenaline that every journalist feels when faced with a big story. But she also felt responsibility. This wasn't just a story, it was a family's life being torn apart. "I will treat this with the care it deserves," she told Albert. "But you need to prepare Marina. She will find out anyway, and it's better that it comes from you than from a news report." Albert knew Beatrice was right. He had spent the night thinking about how he would tell his daughter, what words he would use, how he would protect her from the pain that was to come. But there was no gentle way to tell someone that the person she loves is a lie. At the hospital, Marina was bathing Gabriel for the first time, with Nurse Irene's help. It was a moment that should have been pure joy, but Marina couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Raphael had left again, saying he needed to resolve urgent company matters, and she stayed there, holding her newborn son, feeling strangely alone. "Gabriel," she whispered to the baby, "your mother will protect you from everything. No matter what happens, you will always have love." Nurse Irene heard that and felt a pang in her heart. She had known Marina since she was little, had seen Albert raise her alone after his wife's death, had witnessed the transformation of that shy girl into a strong woman, and now she was about to see Marina go through the most difficult test of her life. Nurse Irene made a decision. She knew she shouldn't, that she would probably lose her job for it, but she couldn't stay silent. "Marina," she said, her voice low but firm, "I need you to know that your father is taking care of everything. Trust him. What's happening will make sense soon, but you need to trust." Marina stopped drying Gabriel and looked at Nurse Irene with wide eyes. "What are you talking about? What is my father doing?" The nurse shook her head, realizing she had already said too much. "Just trust," she repeated, and left the room before Marina could ask more questions. Marina stayed there, holding Gabriel, feeling her heart race. She picked up her phone and called her father, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again, nothing. For the first time since Gabriel was born, Marina felt true fear. It wasn't physical fear, it was something deeper, the fear that her entire life was a lie. Raphael returned to the hospital at lunchtime, bringing Japanese food from Marina's favorite restaurant. He was especially attentive, talking about how perfect Gabriel was, about the plans he had for the future, about the bigger house he wanted to buy. But Marina observed him with different eyes now. She was beginning to see the cracks in the perfect facade Raphael had built. "You've been very busy," Marina said, her voice casual but her eyes attentive. Raphael smiled, that practiced smile. "Important company matters, love. We're closing a big contract and I need to be present." Marina nodded, but inside she was registering every hesitation, every averted gaze, every word that didn't sound completely true. That afternoon, Albert finally went to the hospital. He hadn't visited Marina and Gabriel yet because he was engrossed in the investigation, but he knew he couldn't put it off any longer. He arrived at the suite carrying a huge teddy bear and a bouquet of lilies, his late wife's favorite flowers. Marina was alone when he entered. Raphael had left again, and Gabriel was sleeping peacefully in the bassinet. "Father," Marina said, and Albert saw tears in her eyes. He approached, hugged his daughter tightly, feeling all the pain he was about to inflict on her. But he knew it was necessary. "We need to talk," Albert said, his voice grave. Marina pulled away slightly and looked at her father. She knew that tone. It was the tone he used when he had something serious to say. "About what?" she asked, although part of her already knew the answer. Albert took a deep breath. "About Raphael. About what happened during the birth. About things you need to know." Marina felt her legs weaken. She sat on the bed, holding her father's hands. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice firm despite the fear. And Albert told her. He showed her the recordings on his tablet, explained about Letitia, about the adjustments to the equipment, about the ongoing investigation. Marina watched everything in silence, feeling her world crumble. Each image was a stab. Each revelation destroyed a piece of the life she had built. When the video ended, Marina was pale, her hands trembling. She looked at Gabriel sleeping, and something inside her transformed. It wasn't just pain she felt. It was something deeper. It was the understanding that she needed to be strong, not just for herself, but for the son she had just brought into the world. "I always knew," she finally said, her voice low. "Not like this, not with this clarity, but I felt something was wrong, and I chose to ignore it because it was easier to believe the lie." Albert held his daughter's hands. "This isn't your fault, Marina. Raphael is a professional manipulator. He deceived many people, not just you." Marina shook her head. "No, Father. I saw the signs and chose not to see them. I let my desire for a perfect family blind me to reality. But this ends now." She looked at her father with determination. "What do we need to do?" Albert smiled for the first time in days. That was his daughter, the strong woman he had raised. "First you will recover from childbirth. Then we will plan every step. Maurice is already preparing the divorce papers. Beatrice Finch is investigating Raphael's finances. And I guarantee that when all this comes to light, Raphael will wish he had never met our family." Marina looked at her father, then at Gabriel, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not hope that her marriage could be saved, but hope that she could rebuild her life on true foundations. "I want him to pay," she said, "not just for me, but for all the women he might do this to in the future." That night, Raphael returned to the hospital, unaware that his life was about to implode. He entered the suite with his usual smile, greeted Albert politely, admired Gabriel in the bassinet. Marina watched him, seeing him for the first time as he truly was, an actor playing a role. Raphael noticed something different in Marina's gaze, but attributed it to postpartum exhaustion. He didn't notice the way Albert was watching him, didn't realize he was being evaluated, measured, judged. Men like Raphael rarely notice when they are about to fall, because they never believe they can be brought down. After Albert left, Marina fed Gabriel and put him to sleep. Raphael approached, tried to kiss her, but she turned her face away. "I'm tired," she said, and it wasn't a lie. She was exhausted from pretending, exhausted from believing in illusions, exhausted from being treated as a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't know. Raphael seemed disappointed but didn't insist. He lay down on the sofa, picked up his phone and began typing frantically. Marina watched his reflection in the dark window and saw the true face of the man she had married. It was the face of someone who calculated, who planned, who manipulated. It was the face of a stranger. Elsewhere in the city, Letitia was in her apartment, nervous. Raphael hadn't answered her messages for hours. She was sure something had gone wrong, but she didn't know what. She looked at the expensive gifts Raphael had given her, at the promises he had made, and began to feel the first sting of reality piercing the bubble of fantasy she lived in. The phone rang. It was an unknown number. Letitia hesitated but answered. On the other end, a female voice introduced herself as Beatrice Finch, a journalist. "Letitia," Beatrice said, "I'd like to talk to you about Raphael Miller and what happened at St. Jude's Hospital." Letitia felt her blood run cold. "How did you get my number? Who are you?" Beatrice kept her voice calm, professional. "I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm working on a story about corporate manipulation and fraud. Your name came up during the investigation. You can help me tell your side of the story, or you can let others tell it for you." Letitia hung up the phone, her hands trembling. She tried to call Raphael, but he didn't answer. She tried again and again, feeling the panic grow. She had bet everything on that relationship, had burned bridges, had crossed lines she never imagined crossing. And now she was alone, realizing that perhaps she always had been. At the hospital, Marina finally fell asleep, Gabriel safe in her arms. She dreamed of her mother, who had passed away years ago. In the dream, her mother smiled and said that everything would be fine, that the strength Marina needed had always been within her, just waiting to be discovered. And while London slept under its millions of lights, pieces of a complex game continued to move. Albert in his office, reviewing documents with Maurice, Beatrice in her newsroom writing the first draft of the story that would change everything, Raphael on the hospital suite sofa, sending messages to Letitia that she wasn't answering, beginning to feel the first pang of worry. "Truth is like the sun," Albert always told Marina when she was a child. "You can try to hide it for a while, but eventually it rises and illuminates everything." And dawn was coming, bringing with it a light that would spare no one. On Gabriel's third day of life, Marina was discharged from the hospital. She carefully got ready, dressed Gabriel in the outfit she had chosen months ago, and prepared to go home. But she knew that the home she was returning to would not be the same. Nothing would be. Raphael was strangely silent as he drove. Marina watched the city pass by the window, London in all its chaotic glory, and felt that she was seeing everything with new eyes. Every building, every street, every person on the sidewalk represented a story, and she was about to rewrite hers. When they arrived at the apartment in Kensington, Marina saw that her life was divided into two moments, before knowing the truth and after. And the after was just beginning. The first days at home were a strange mix of newborn routine and escalating tension. Marina cared for Gabriel with that dedication only mothers know, waking every 3 hours to breastfeed, changing diapers, rocking her son to sleep. But every gesture was accompanied by an acute awareness that her life was about to explode. Raphael continued to act as if nothing had changed. He went to the office every morning, returned for dinner, asked about Gabriel, offered help that Marina politely refused. But she saw the tension growing in him too. He checked his phone constantly, answered calls in another room, spoke softly on the phone. Marina knew he was trying to control a situation that had already slipped from his hands. On Thursday of that week, 1 week after Gabriel's birth, Beatrice Finch's article was published. It wasn't in a sensationalist newspaper, but in one of the most respected publications in the country, with a front-page headline and a 5-page report. The title was direct and devastating: "The Hidden Face of Success: How a London Businessman Manipulated His Own Wife During Childbirth." The article did not name Raphael directly, following legal protocols, but anyone close to the family would immediately recognize who it was about. Beatrice had done meticulous work, interviewing hospital staff under condition of anonymity, reviewing corporate documents, building a psychological profile of successful manipulators in the business world. The repercussion was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with theories and speculations. Gossip sites began trying to identify the businessman in question. And at Raphael's company, partners began asking uncomfortable questions. Raphael read the article in his office, feeling his blood run cold. He immediately called his lawyers, demanded they sue the newspaper for defamation, threatened actions that could take years. But his lawyers, after carefully reading the report, said there was no basis for a lawsuit. Everything was documented, every statement had verifiable sources, and there was no direct naming. It was then that Raphael understood. This was not the work of a curious journalist. It was a calculated operation, and he knew exactly who was behind. Albert Albright, his father-in-law, the man he had completely underestimated, thinking he would be easy to manipulate. Raphael returned home early that day, trying to maintain his composure. Marina was in the living room, breastfeeding Gabriel, and didn't even look up when he entered. "Did you see the article?" Raphael asked, his voice trying to sound casual. Marina finally looked at him, and in that gaze there was something he had never seen before: contempt. "I did," she replied, her voice calm. "Very interesting, don't you think?" Raphael felt anger rise, but he controlled himself. "Marina, love, you know, these are lies. Someone is trying to harm us, harm our businesses." Marina smiled, but it was a humorless smile. "Our businesses, Raphael? I didn't know we had businesses together. I thought you had your businesses, your mistresses, your conspiracies." The silence that followed was absolute. Raphael opened his mouth to deny, to fabricate another lie, but something in Marina's eyes stopped him. She knew, not just suspected, she knew everything. "Who told you?" he finally asked, the mask of the perfect husband finally falling. Marina finished breastfeeding Gabriel, placed him in the portable bassinet, and turned to Raphael with a calm she didn't know she possessed. "No one needed to tell me, Raphael. I saw the videos. I saw you and your mistress exchanging glances while I was giving birth to our son. I saw you smiling when that false alarm went off, when I panicked thinking something was wrong with Gabriel." Raphael tried to approach, but Marina raised her hand. "No," she said, her voice firm. "Don't come near me. Don't touch me. Don't pretend anymore. It's over." Raphael felt the ground give way beneath his feet. He had planned so carefully, had calculated every step, but he hadn't considered that the hospital's security cameras would capture everything. He hadn't considered that Albert Albright would be relentless when it came to protecting his daughter. "Marina," he tried, "we need to talk about this calmly. Think about our son, our family." Marina laughed, a bitter sound. "Our family? You destroyed our family, Raphael. You planned this, executed this, thought you could manipulate me until I accepted a divorce on your terms. But you forgot one thing. I am Albert Albright's daughter, and in my family the truth always comes out." Raphael realized he had lost. Not just Marina, not just the marriage, but everything. His reputation was ruined. His partners would start investigating the company's finances, and when they discovered the irregularities, he would be finished. He did the only thing men like him know how to do when cornered. He attacked. "You think you're so perfect," Raphael said, his voice full of venom. "You think your father is a saint? He built an empire by destroying others, and you, living in this bubble of privilege, have you never wondered where all that money comes from?" Marina was unfazed. "My father may not be perfect, but he never lied to me. He never betrayed me. He never put a mistress to watch over me during the most vulnerable moment of my life." Raphael knew he had lost the argument. He grabbed his keys and slammed the door as he left. Marina heard the elevator descend, heard his car leaving the garage, and only then allowed the tears to fall. They were not tears of sadness. They were of relief. The worst was over. The truth was exposed. And now she could begin to rebuild. She picked up the phone and called her father. "He left," was all she needed to say. Albert, who had been waiting for that call, responded immediately. "I already have people following him. Maurice is finalizing the divorce papers, and Beatrice told me the article had over 2 million online views. People are demanding to know who the businessman is." Marina took a deep breath. "Then let's give them his name. Let's remove all the masks." Albert hesitated. "Marina, when this happens, your lives will never be private again. There will be cameras, journalists, speculation. You and Gabriel will be at the center of a media storm." "I know," Marina replied. "But it's better to face it now than to live hiding the truth, and other women need to know who he is." Albert felt proud of his daughter. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow Beatrice will publish a second article, this time naming Raphael, and Maurice will file for divorce simultaneously. It will be a difficult day." Marina looked at Gabriel sleeping peacefully. "My son will grow up knowing that his mother fought for the truth. That's all that matters." That night, Marina didn't sleep. She stayed awake, thinking about how her life had changed so drastically in a week. 7 days ago, she was a married woman about to give birth, believing in a future with Raphael. Now she was a single mother facing a public scandal. But strangely, she felt stronger than ever. Raphael, on the other hand, was in an expensive bar in Shoreditch, drinking whiskey and trying to call Letitia. She didn't answer. No one answered. His partners had scheduled an emergency meeting for the next day. His lawyers said the prospects were not good. And his mistress, the woman for whom he had risked everything, had disappeared. Letitia was in a cheap hotel in the East End of London, hidden, terrified. Beatrice Finch had managed to locate her and made a proposal. "Tell your side of the story before Raphael turns you into the villain." Letitia spent the entire night thinking. She had been manipulated as much as Marina, just in a different way. Raphael had promised to leave his wife, promised a life together, promised that she would be more than a hidden mistress. But Letitia knew the truth now. She was disposable. A pawn in a game Raphael played alone. And when the scandal fully exploded, he would sacrifice her without hesitation to save his own skin. So she made a choice. The next morning she called Beatrice and agreed to give an interview. Beatrice's second article was published on Friday, exactly 8 days after Gabriel's birth. This time, there were no half measures. Raphael Miller was named, his company was identified, and Letitia told her version of events. She admitted everything: the affair, the falsification of credentials, the adjustments to the equipment, but she explained that she had been manipulated by Raphael, that he had promised to leave Marina, that she had believed she was fighting for true love. The City of London woke up to that bombshell. Television channels began covering the story, radio programs debated the case, social media exploded. Raphael Miller became the most hated man in the UK in a matter of hours. His photo was everywhere, always accompanied by descriptions like manipulator, traitor, emotional predator. At the company, the partners' meeting was brief and brutal. They voted for Raphael's immediate removal from all executive positions. Maurice, Albert's lawyer, had already provided evidence of the financial irregularities, and a formal investigation was opened. Raphael was escorted out of the very building he had helped build, under the gaze of employees who had respected him and now despised him. Marina watched it all on television, Gabriel in her arms. She felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for the lost time, for the illusion she had believed, for the hopes that had been crushed. But along with the sadness, there was something else: determination. The phone didn't stop ringing. Friends wanting to know if she was okay, family members offering support, even strangers sending messages of solidarity. Marina realized that her story had touched something deep in many women. How many of them had gone through similar situations? How many had been manipulated, betrayed, devalued? Albert appeared late in the afternoon, bringing documents for Marina to sign. The divorce would be quick, given the public scandal and the irrefutable evidence of infidelity and manipulation. Maurice had ensured that Marina would have full custody of Gabriel, a generous alimony, and half of the assets Raphael possessed before the scandal revealed the irregularities. Marina signed the papers without hesitation. "How are you, daughter?" Albert asked, concern evident in his voice. Marina looked at her father, the man who had always protected her, who had always fought for her. "I'm fine, father. For the first time in months, maybe years, I'm truly fine. Not happy yet, but fine. I feel like I can breathe." Albert hugged his daughter, feeling the weight of all the decisions he had made to get there. He knew the path had been hard, that exposing Raphael publicly would bring consequences for Marina too. But he believed that the truth, however painful, was always better than the lie. In the following days, the story continued to unfold. Federal investigations were opened to examine Raphael's business practices. Other women began to come forward, reporting similar manipulative behaviors in past relationships. What started as one family's story turned into a social phenomenon, fueling discussions about emotional manipulation, psychological abuse, and the dangers of power without ethics. Raphael tried to give interviews defending himself, but each public appearance only made things worse. He couldn't seem sincere, every word sounded rehearsed, every tear seemed fake. The truth is that men like Raphael are experts at manipulating individuals, but not masses. When exposed publicly, their tactics become obvious, their lies transparent. Letitia, on the other hand, began to rebuild her life. She started working as a consultant for an NGO that helped women in abusive relationships, using her own experience to help others. She and Marina never spoke directly, but there was a mutual understanding. Both were victims of Raphael, just in different ways, and both chose to transform pain into purpose. Marina observed all this from her temporary bubble of privacy. She had asked the press to respect her time for postpartum recovery and caring for her newborn, and surprisingly, most respected it. She used that time to reconnect with herself, to understand how she had gotten there, to plan who she wanted to be from now on. One afternoon, while breastfeeding Gabriel, Marina had an epiphany. Her story was not just hers. It was the story of all women who had been manipulated, silenced, devalued. And she had a platform now, a voice that was being heard. She could use it for good. She called Beatrice Finch and proposed a partnership. "I want to create a foundation," Marina said, "for women who experience emotional manipulation in relationships, who need legal, psychological, financial support. I want my story to serve something greater than just my personal justice." Beatrice was silent for a moment, then said, "That's exactly what the world needs to hear from you, Marina. When you're ready, we'll make it happen." Marina smiled, looking at Gabriel. "I'm ready," she said. "I've been preparing for this my whole life. I just didn't know it." As London continued its frantic routine, indifferent to the individual dramas unfolding in its millions of homes, Marina Albright began to transform her pain into purpose, her story into legacy, her vulnerability into strength. And Raphael Miller, the man who thought he could manipulate everything and everyone, discovered that there are consequences that no amount of money or charm can erase. The worst was over, but the best was yet to come. 6 months had passed since that day at St. Jude's Hospital that had changed everything. London was entering spring, and with it, a sense of renewal hung in the air. Marina was sitting in her father's office, not as a visitor, but as a partner. In front of her, a model of the future headquarters of the New Beginning Foundation, the institution she had created to help women victims of emotional manipulation and psychological abuse. Gabriel, now 6 months old, played in the playpen nearby. Babbling sounds Marina swore were attempts to speak. He was a healthy, joyful baby, completely, oblivious to the turmoil that had surrounded his birth. And Marina wanted him to stay that way. She wanted him to grow up in an environment of truth, strength, and genuine love. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Raphael did not contest it, not because he was noble, but because he had no choice. The evidence was irrefutable, and contesting would only prolong his public exposure. He lost custody of Gabriel, receiving rights only to supervised visits that he had never exercised so far. Marina suspected he never would. Raphael didn't want a child. He wanted an image of a perfect family to complement his persona as a successful businessman. Investigations into Raphael's business practices revealed a complex fraud scheme. He had embezzled millions through phantom consultancies, inflated contracts, and hidden assets in offshore companies. The courts froze his assets, and he faced criminal proceedings that could result in years of convictions. Marina felt no satisfaction at Raphael's downfall. She felt relief, but also a sadness for the person he could have been if he had chosen different paths. She learned that anger is like poison. You drink it, hoping the other person dies. So she let the anger go and chose to focus on the future. The New Beginning Foundation was born from a conversation between Marina, Beatrice, and a group of psychologists specializing in abusive relationships. The idea was to create a space where women could find free legal support, psychological counseling, financial guidance, and a support network. Albert provided the initial capital and the physical space, a 3-story building in Shoreditch that would be renovated to meet the foundation's needs. But Marina wanted more. She wanted the foundation to also educate, to teach women to recognize signs of manipulation before it was too late. She wanted lectures in schools, universities, companies. She wanted to break the silence that allowed men like Raphael to continue operating in the shadows. The inauguration was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Marina had given only one interview since the scandal, a long and deep conversation with Beatrice that was featured on the cover of an important women's magazine. In it, Marina spoke openly about her journey, about the signs she ignored, about the healing process that was still underway. The interview had an immense impact. Thousands of women wrote to Marina, sharing their own stories of manipulation and emotional abuse. Some had just left toxic relationships, others were still trapped in them, seeking the courage to leave. Marina read every message, every story, and felt the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. Albert watched his daughter with silent pride. She had transformed in recent months. The woman he had seen in the hospital, fragile and betrayed, had given way to someone stronger, more aware, more determined. Of course, there were still difficult moments, nights when Marina cried thinking about how her life could have been different, but she didn't let the pain define her. Raphael, on the other hand, had practically disappeared from public life. His assets remained frozen as investigations continued. He lived in a rented apartment in a less affluent neighborhood, far from the ostentation of Kensington. His old friends abandoned him, his partners sued him, and his reputation was destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. He tried to approach Marina a few times, sending messages asking for forgiveness, saying he wanted to see his son. But Maurice, the lawyer, intercepted all communications. Raphael had lost the right to direct access to Marina and Gabriel when the evidence of his manipulation came to light. If he wanted contact, he would have to follow legal channels, and so far he had not done so. Leticia also rebuilt her life. She started working as a consultant for an NGO that assisted women in abusive relationships, using her own experience to help others. She and Marina never spoke directly, but there was a mutual understanding. Both were victims of Raphael, just in different ways, and both chose to transform pain into purpose. One afternoon, 2 weeks before the foundation's inauguration, Marina was at home when she received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Henry Carter, the obstetrician, who had delivered Gabriel. He asked to visit her, said he had something important to say. Marina agreed, curious. Dr. Henry arrived carrying a small gift for Gabriel. They sat in the living room, and the doctor took a deep breath before speaking. "Marina, I need to apologize. That day at the hospital, I realized something was wrong. I saw the exchanged glances. I saw Leticia make adjustments that didn't make sense. But I didn't say anything. I omitted it." Marina observed him, seeing the guilt in his eyes. "Why?" she asked, without judgment, just genuine curiosity. Dr. Henry lowered his eyes. "Fear. fear of confronting someone powerful like Raphael, fear of losing patients, fear of complications. I convinced myself that it was nothing serious, that I was imagining things. But I knew, and my silence was complicity. Marina felt compassion for the man in front of her. She understood the fear that made people keep silent, that made women accept abuse, that made witnesses turn their backs. "Dr. Carter," she said softly, "you are here now, acknowledging this. That counts for something." The doctor looked at Marina with gratitude. "Since everything came out," he said, "I haven't had peace. I started seeing similar cases elsewhere, women being pressured, silenced, manipulated, and I realized that my silence contributed to perpetuating this. So I want to do something. I want to volunteer at your foundation, train other doctors to recognize signs of manipulation and abuse." Marina smiled, that genuine smile that came from the heart. "It would be an honor to have you with us, Doctor. Together we can educate, prevent, protect." The doctor left feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Nurse Irene, the nurse who first tried to warn Marina, also joined the foundation. She would bring decades of experience, stories she had witnessed in hospital corridors, of women who suffered in silence. The New Beginning Foundation team was forming, not only with qualified professionals, but with people who deeply understood what it meant to fight against manipulation and abuse. The inauguration week arrived quickly. Marina was nervous, not about the event itself, but about the speech she would have to give. It would be the first time she spoke publicly, in front of cameras and microphones, about her experience. Beatrice helped her prepare the words, but insisted that Marina speak from the heart, not from a memorized script. Albert watched the preparations with that mixture of pride and melancholy that parents feel when they see their children grow up and become independent. Marina no longer needed his protection in the same way. She had found strength within herself, and that was more powerful than any external protection he could offer. The night before the inauguration, Marina put Gabriel to sleep and watched her son for a long time. He slept peacefully, his fists clenched, his breathing soft. She thought of all the mothers who didn't have that peace, who lived in a constant state of alert, who needed to protect their children from toxic environments and destructive relationships. "Tomorrow," she whispered to sleeping Gabriel, "your mother is going to do something important. She's going to use our story to help other people. And one day, when you grow up, you'll understand why this matters so much." The inauguration day dawned sunny, one of those spring days in London where the sky seems bluer and the air lighter. The headquarters of the New Beginning Foundation was decorated with white flowers, a symbol of new beginnings. There were chairs for 200 people, all occupied. Journalists, activists, women who had been helped during the months of preparation, politicians, businessmen, and many, many ordinary people who wanted to show support. Marina was backstage, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress, Gabriel in her arms. Albert was by her side, holding her free hand. "Are you ready?" he asked. Marina took a deep breath. "I was born ready, Father. I just didn't know it until I was forced to discover it." Beatrice was the master of ceremonies, introducing the foundation, its mission, and its objectives. She spoke about alarming statistics of emotional manipulation in relationships, about how society often blames victims instead of perpetrators, about the importance of breaking cycles of silence. Then came Marina's moment to speak. She walked onto the stage to applause, handed Gabriel to Nurse Irene, who was in the front row, and walked to the microphone. For a moment she just observed all those people, all those stories gathered in that space. "My name is Marina Albright," she began, her voice clear but emotional. "And 6 months ago I gave birth to my son under circumstances I never imagined living through." She told her story, sparing no details, not hiding her initial pain or shame. She spoke about the signs she ignored, about how love can blind, about how manipulation is subtle and progressive. "But I was lucky," she continued. "I had resources. I had a father who fought for me. I had access to lawyers and journalists who exposed the truth. How many women don't have that luck? How many suffer in silence because they have nowhere to go, because they are afraid, because they have been convinced that they are the problem?" Marina saw tears in the eyes of many people in the audience. She saw women nodding in agreement. She saw men visibly uncomfortable, confronting perhaps for the first time behaviors they themselves had exhibited. She saw change happening there, in that moment. The New Beginning Foundation exists for these women, Marina said, her voice now firmer, to provide legal, emotional, financial support, to tell you that you are not alone, that you are not crazy, that your experiences are real and valid, to teach that true love does not manipulate, does not control, does not diminish. She paused, looking at Gabriel in Nurse Irene's arms. And it also exists for future generations, so that boys like my Gabriel grow up understanding that respect is the basis of any relationship, so that girls grow up knowing that they deserve to be treated with dignity, always. The speech lasted 20 minutes, and when Marina finished, the silence that followed was absolute. Then one person began to applaud, then another, and another, until the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding not only Marina, but all the women she represented, all the stories that echoed in hers. Marina stepped off the stage and went directly to hug her father. Albert held his daughter tightly, feeling tears wet his shirt. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he whispered. Marina smiled through her tears. "I know, Father. I feel her here with us." In the following months, the New Beginning Foundation assisted hundreds of women. Some needed only guidance, others legal protection, some temporary shelter. Each story was unique, but all shared common elements: manipulation, gaslighting, control, systematic devaluation. Marina personally involved herself in every aspect of the foundation. She participated in support groups, talked to women who arrived scared and confused, oversaw legal cases. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of so many painful stories crushed her. But she knew it was necessary. Gabriel grew up surrounded by love and examples of feminine strength. Nurse Irene was a constant presence, as was Beatrice, who had become almost an aunt to the boy. Albert continued to be the dedicated grandfather, always present, always supportive. Raphael tried to make contact one last time, a year after the scandal. He sent a handwritten letter asking for forgiveness. He said he had been in therapy, that he understood now what he had done, that he wanted a chance to know Gabriel. Marina read the letter and felt pity. Not the kind of pity that leads to easy forgiveness, but genuine pity for someone who destroyed his own life out of greed and ego. She responded through Maurice. If Raphael had truly changed, she wrote, he would understand that knowing Gabriel was not his right, but a privilege that needed to be earned through years of consistent behavior. When and if Gabriel was old enough to decide, it would be his choice to have contact with his father. Until then, she would respect the limits set by the court. Raphael never responded. Perhaps he finally understood that some consequences are permanent, that some damages cannot be completely repaired. Or perhaps he just realized that he didn't really want to be a father. He just wanted to alleviate his own guilt. 2 years after the foundation's inauguration, Marina was invited to give a lecture at an international conference on women's rights. She hesitated, but Albert encouraged her. "Your story can inspire changes far beyond London," he said. "It can help women worldwide." Marina accepted, and on stage, in front of an audience of thousands of people from dozens of countries, she told her story again. But this time, it wasn't just about pain and betrayal. It was about resilience, rebuilding, and hope. It was about how the worst moment of her life became the catalyst for significant change. The lecture was recorded and went viral. Millions of views, shared in dozens of languages, cited in articles and books. Marina Albright became an important voice in the movement against emotional manipulation and psychological abuse. But she never forgot where she came from, never distanced herself from the women the New Beginning Foundation served daily. Gabriel grew up in an environment of love, truth, and strength. At 5, he asked about his father for the first time. Marina, who knew this day would come, sat down with her son and had an honest, age-appropriate conversation. She explained that sometimes adults make bad choices, that true love is shown in actions, not just words. Gabriel, wise beyond his years, simply nodded and asked if he could go back to playing with his building blocks. For him, family was Grandpa Albert, Nurse Irene, Beatrice, and all the strong women who passed through his mother's foundation. It was the definition of family he knew, and it was more than enough. Marina sometimes looked back to that day at St. Jude's Hospital that changed everything. She no longer felt pain, only gratitude. Gratitude for having discovered the truth, for having found strength, for having transformed trauma into purpose. If she could go back and change something, she wouldn't, because every experience, however painful, had shaped her into the woman she had become. Albert, now in his 70s, watched his daughter with that peace that comes from knowing his legacy was in good hands. The New Beginning Foundation expanded to other cities, helping thousands of women, and Marina continued to be the heart of that operation, always present, always dedicated. One Sunday afternoon, Marina was in her apartment with Gabriel, now 7 years old, when he asked, "Mum, are you happy?" Marina stopped what she was doing and looked at her son, at his curious and sincere eyes. "I am, my love, very happy. Not in the way I imagined I would be, but perhaps in a better way." Gabriel smiled and went back to drawing. Marina looked out the window, seeing London in all its immensity and complexity. She thought of all the women the foundation helped, of all the lives that were transformed, of all the stories that were rewritten. And she felt that her story, however difficult the path had been, was worth every tear, every challenge, every moment of pain. Because in the end, she was no longer the woman who was betrayed on the most vulnerable day of her life. She was the woman who transformed that betrayal into a movement, who used her pain to alleviate the pain of others, who proved that endings are not written by circumstances, but by the choices we make in response to them. And as the sun set over London, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, Marina hugged Gabriel and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she should be doing. Her purpose had been forged in the fire of adversity, and now shone brighter than any diamond Raphael could have given her. Marina's life was not perfect. There were still challenges, there were still difficult days, but it was real, it was honest, and it was entirely hers. And that, she discovered, was worth more than any fairy tale she had once believed. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Marina's story and her journey from pain to purpose has touched your heart. If you were moved, if you recognized elements of this story in your own life, or if you simply believe in the importance of supporting women who face manipulation and abuse, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that even in the darkest moments, there is hope for a new beginning. Your story matters, your voice matters, and together we can create a current of support and transformation. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, where we will continue exploring the complexities of the human heart and the power of resilience.